Israeli pro-Palestinian activist and author, joins us now via Zoom in the United States to talk to us. Here's Miko Peled. Miko, great to talk to you again. Are you well?
Thank you. Yes, good to see you again. How are you?
Fantastic. All right, let's chat about President Biden's visit to Israel. He's landed in Tel Aviv, the declared capital by the Israelis. Must we read anything into that?
Well, you know, I think South Africans can relate to this probably more than any other nation. Imagine an American president landing and being greeted by the apartheid regime during apartheid in South Africa and saying, I am a proud supporter of apartheid, I am an apartheid man. And then speaking about how apartheid South Africa is committed to human rights, justice, and equality. This is precisely what we saw today at the airport, which, by the way, sits on occupied Palestinian land of the city of Lid. So it's very convenient that we all call it Tel Aviv Airport, but it's actually sitting on Palestinian occupied land. And that's exactly what we saw today. Yeah. We saw this enormous amounts of hypocrisy and lying. Israel has not committed to human rights any more than apartheid South Africa during the apartheid regime was committed to human rights or equality or justice. Yet there's this charade going on at the same time as Palestinians are dying of thirst for water, dying of hunger, dying of lack of medicine, and living under the brutal apartheid regime, which is now 75 years long almost in Palestine.
Let's talk about his itinerary. So Jerusalem meeting with the Israeli leaders, that's a given. But he's going to the West Bank and is meeting Mahmoud Abbas. What do we read into that? Some people don't see Abbas as the only voice of the Palestinian cause.
Well, I think the tragedy is that, an American Palestinian journalist was assassinated by Israel only recently, Shireen Abu Akleh, and he is not meeting with her family, and he's not demanding accountability by the Israelis, where, 3 separate investigations have concluded that she was assassinated by Israelis. And I would go further in saying that the assassination of a high-profile journalist, just as Shireen Abu Akleh was, could not have taken place without at least an okay, if not an order, from the very top of the Israeli defense hierarchy. So at least the Minister of Defense, if not the Prime Minister. And yet Biden is silent on this. And then he's meeting with Mahmoud Abbas. They'll be taking some pictures. Perhaps there'll be a few $100 million going to the Palestinian Authority, which we all know has no authority and represents no one. It does not deal with the Palestinian issues. It is incapable of representing the Palestinians. But it's this puppet regime that is in place right now. So his meeting in Bethlehem with Mahmoud Abbas will benefit not a single Palestinian. We can be absolutely sure of that.
Would Israel have had a hand in saying who he can and cannot see on his trip?
Oh, I'm sure they consulted with Israel as to who he can and cannot see. But Biden is a willing culprit in this. He's very happy to be part of this, complicit in this charade, because as he said many times throughout his career, and then again today, as he landed, he is a Zionist and a proud Zionist. And like I said earlier, to say I'm a proud Zionist is exactly as it would have been to say I'm a proud supporter of apartheid in South Africa, because the two are mean exactly the same thing. And I don't think he has any interest in meeting real Palestinian leaders. He has no interest in discussing the Shireen Abu Akleh assassination. He's quite happy to go along with this charade. He will continue to sell weapons to Israel. You mentioned earlier in the program talks about security, and the question that has to be asked is, well, who is going to talk about the security for Palestinians? Because Palestinians have no security. Palestinians have no one who is speaking about their issue of security, because they are being killed on a daily basis almost, and nobody is defending them. Nobody is standing there. Just again, as Shireen Abu Akleh was killed, and she had no safety net, no security, nobody standing up for her. So they're selling Israel all these weapons. Israel is showing off the Iron Dome and the Iron this and the Iron that, all these weapons technology that is being used against an enemy which never had a military force, which of course are the Palestinian people. So it's charade after charade after charade while Palestinians are being killed, and nobody discusses security for Palestinians. Nobody discusses safety for Palestinians. Perhaps Palestinians should be buying weapons as well to defend themselves against the onslaught of Israeli violence. But that is never being discussed.
Israel has been struggling quite a bit, more and more in recent years, in terms of PR, how people see the country. I'm guessing that a visit by a sitting US president is quite important for them in terms of trying to fix their image problem.
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge boost. A visit from the US president is a huge boost because the president doesn't come alone. Of course, he comes with a huge entourage, and this means economic ties, this means more diplomatic ties, this means more recognition and so forth. And I think there's a sense around the world, particularly around the world, that the state of Israel and Israeli prime ministers have the ear of the president, and that, of course, raises their esteem in the eyes of the rest of the world, and of course in the eyes of their own constituents when elections come up. So this is without a doubt a great PR campaign, a great PR piece for Israel. It allows Israel to continue to portray itself as peace-loving, as part of the Western world, as part of the developed world, as as a partner in the fight against Putin and so on. But at the same time, what they're not discussing is the ongoing brutality and oppression, and as was very well defined by Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and other agencies, an apartheid regime that has been in existence pretty much since the apartheid regime was in existence in South Africa, only it's still going on in Palestine.
A lot of people would say that America has chosen a side in this conflict, and the question now becomes, is why Israel and at all costs?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it is true. Israel, the United States has picked a side, and by the way, the United States was also picked a side in apartheid South Africa at the time, and America stood very strongly on the side of apartheid. I think America was the very last country to agree to boycott South Africa, the apartheid regime, and it was, I believe, in the late 80s, so very close to the end of apartheid. And this has to do with the fact that in the case of Israel, it has to do with the fact that for a very long time, I would say at least 100 years, there has been a very strong and very effective Zionist lobby in the United States, as well as in Great Britain and other places. And it's a very effective lobby. They know exactly how to speak the language that the Americans understand. And they also know that in the United States, all politics are local. So the Zionist lobby is not a bunch of people with suits in Washington, D.C. necessarily, although they're there as well. But these are people in every city, in the local school boards, in the city councils, in the mayoral races. They're in touch with police chiefs in the different cities. Everybody that runs for office, whether it's school board or city council, gets invited to a trip to Israel, all paid for. Police chiefs, of course, are invited to collaborate with the Israeli military, the Israeli police, and so on. So the ties are very, very deep, and they start at the very, very ground level of American politics. And it's been going on, like I said, since before the State of Israel was established. So this is a very effective PR machine, a very effective lobby. And those of us who stand on the side of justice and peace and human rights, particularly for Palestinians, we have our work cut out for us because they've been doing this for a long time. And like I said, the Israeli side is very, very good at what they're doing.
All right. Israel's a country you know well. In many respects, it's your country. Are there many Israeli Jews who will be looking at this visit and not embracing it in the same way as the Prime Minister, for example?
No, I think Israelis are going to be very happy by this. Israelis are very excited. When an American president comes, Israeli society, by and large, is very, very excited. They don't mind the traffic jams, and they don't mind the fact that, traffic will be blocked throughout Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and so forth, because it's a sign that, we're loved by the president of the United States, and there's really no greater honor. Israeli society, sadly, is by and large supports the racism and the apartheid that exists. I mean, they vote for them. For Israelis, it's a sort of a democracy, really. So they've been voting in these racist, violent figures into into power, into government, for over 70 years now. And Israelis are very, very happy about this. It shows that Israel is on the map. Some people say, finally, we're a country like all the other countries, and so on. And they're quite happy that none of the issues that are embarrassing to Israel are being discussed, like human rights abuses, like over 2 million people living in a ghetto in Gaza, which is only 30 minutes by car from where the President Biden landed. I mean, if they were when they bomb Gaza, you can see it from the beaches on Tel Aviv, and people don't stop going to the beach or to the restaurants or the cafes. So I think that by and large, Israelis are extremely happy. The press is very happy with this. They hope for great things, and they know that when the American president lands, big things happen. The president doesn't show up just for nothing. Big things are going to happen, and I think the biggest expectation is that when he goes to Saudi Arabia, he will take. This will bring one more step, a large step closer to normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia.
Miko, always good talking to you. Thank you so much indeed. I look forward to our next conversation already. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. A pleasure.
All right, that's Miko Peled, who's an Israeli pro-Palestinian activist and author, talking to us about President Biden's visit to Israel. And from a Palestinian perspective, he says there's not much they can expect from this visit, given America's stance firmly entrenched behind Israel.